Guys, the year is 5,784, not 2024. Remember, the change to our calendars was done deliberately to confuse the world, just like it was foretold in prophecy. And why is it important we use the Jewish calendar of days rather than the one we've used since the year 525, when it was actually the year 4,285? So was this deliberate or just a coincidence? So did this guy, Dionysius Exiguus, who was a 6th century monk. And by the way, here's another example of messing things up. 6th century encompasses the years from 500 to 600, which is why I usually use the actual years instead of century, because again, it can be so confusing. Anyway, he was the inventor of what's known as Anno Domini dating, which we now abbreviate as AD. This whole scheme changed the former Hebrew lunar calendar to a religious solar calendar centered around the celebration of Easter. Originally, it was Anno Domini Nostri Jesu Christi, or in the year of our Lord Jesus Christ, and then Ante Christ Natum, or before Christ was born. Making its way around the world, this was shortened to BC, before Christ, and AC, after Christ. Now in the modern era, BC or BCE means before the Common Era, and AC, after the Common Era. The whole thing is now confusing because after the initial change, the years previous to the change were now moving backward instead of forward until the year 1 BC, which is immediately followed by 1 AD, then begins to move forward again. There is no year 0. But the Easter holiday was nothing new to the Romans. They were basically covering over an existing fertility holiday, usually celebrated in spring with bunnies and eggs, and replacing it with a Christian theme. Easter took its name from the pagan goddess Austrae, the goddess of spring and fertility. Many Christian countries around the world now use the terms Pascha, Pasqua, and Pasach in their language, which is their translation for the Hebrew Pesach, which is when the angel of death passed over the homes of the Hebrews in Egypt. But they now call Jesus the Paschal Lamb, stating that the belief in Jesus saves, even though there's no such doctrine or prophecy in Tanakh. There really isn't. But was this pure coincidence, a plan, or what? Again, we now have people worshiping the person, or as some even believe, God incarnate, Jesus, rather than the one God we are supposed to. So whether you follow Jewish prophecy as a Christian or any other religion, it was originally written in Hebrew using the counting of days in lunar months. But here we have a conundrum, or do we? If you have grown accustomed to reading prophecy in English based on a Christian perspective, you are definitely at a disadvantage. Why? Because Hebrew writings were never meant to be translated into any language. And I know Hebrew sounds like a very difficult language to read, but it's really not if you can read and speak English. Like Spanish, Hebrew is a phonetic language, meaning once you know the sounds a letter makes, you can easily read it like you would English, even though you may not know what it means. Of course, like any language, they each have a few peculiar idiosyncrasies, but on the whole, they can easily be read and spoken, the way you would in English. And it seems when it comes to people, places, and things far into the future, certain words will definitely pop out, even more so than they would have to those at the time the prophecies were written or spoken. For instance, the first time we can read about what they will do in the future, far into the future, about changing the dates and times to confuse people, is in the prophecy of Daniel, and a copy of that scroll was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, dated to about somewhere around the 1st century, the year 100, a little before, a little after, and it was exactly the same as it had been in Tanakh for many, many hundreds of years. This is why the first book I published was a literal translation of what's called the Book of Revelation. Yes, it does contain revelations, but it was actually a packet of letters from Yochanan to the Jewish communities in and around modern-day Turkey, and then warnings regarding future events that would affect them and the entire world. Reading the literal translation without any bias, namely from the Romans at the time, who had just put down a Jewish rebellion in Judea, destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, killed the ones known as John the Baptist, Jesus, and most, if not all, of their followers. So are we to believe that they will put together a translation of Hebrew prophecies written by a leader in the Jewish community without any bias? Of course not. I've also done the book of Zechariah, and you can find both of these books on Amazon. And I've also read them chapter by chapter here on TikTok. So if you're interested, you can get the book or just listen to them here. And if you want to know the actual date and the times of Hebrew calendar and all the festivals, you can download an app. It's called a Zimonim, and there are many different ones that you can download to see the year today and then what the year actually is.